Hello everyone. This video is going to cover exercise 1413B, preparing a cash budget. So we've got Oscar Fox, the accounting manager at Onaka Antique Company, and they prepared the following cash budget. They desire to have a cash cushion of $2,000 at the end of each month, and funds are assumed to be borrowed and repaid on the last day of each month. Interest is charged at the rate of 1% per month. So the first thing we need to do is complete the cash budget by filling in the missing amounts, and we are to round all computations to the nearest whole dollar. All right, so they tell us that in July, we start with $10,000 cash. We add cash receipts or cash sales of $90,000 for total available cash of $100,000. We then have our inventory purchases of $81,000. We have selling and administrative expenses of $18,500 for our total budgeted expenses of $99,500. So then we end up with a cash surplus of $500. However, we want to have an ending cash balance of $2,000. So to get to that $2,000, we need to borrow $1,500. So that's what we do at the end of August, or at the end of July. So now we start to fill in August. Well, our beginning cash balance. We need to take our ending July balance and bring that up to our beginning August balance. So August, we start with $2,000 in our cash budget. We gain cash receipts of $96,000. So total for cash available in the month of August, we have $98,000 available to us. For our inventory, we purchase $76,500. We have administrative expenses of $18,000. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out how much do we owe in interest expense at 1% per month. So for August, we have a total of $15,000 in loans. So we need to take that times our 0.01% or 0.1%. So then we find out when we do that, it is a total of $15 that we owe in interest at the end of August. So our total disbursements for cash are going to be, when we add all of that up, $94,515. So then our shortage or surplus, you should see that these two are flipped on yours. When we take 1,000 minus the 94,515, we should end up with a surplus of $3,485. I'm going to actually switch these. So this should be my cash surplus or shortage. This is your financing activity up here. Sorry about that. 100 there. All right. And since we want to have $2,000 left, that means that we can repay $1,485 of our loan. So now we've got to figure out September, which again, we take our ending balance and bring that up to our beginning balance of September, which is $2,000. Add that to the $104,000 and we should end up with a total cash available of $106,000. They again tell us your inventory purchases. They tell you your selling and administrative expenses. And these amounts for all of these would come from your sales budget, your inventory purchases budget, and your selling and administrative expenses budgets. So make sure you know that those come from those operating budgets that we would have created. But for this problem, they're giving them to you. So now we find that we have $15 left in interest. If you take 1,500 minus the 1,485, so we need to take $15 times 0.01, which is our 1%. And when you do that, you get 15 cents. But since we are rounding to the nearest whole dollar, as it tells us right there, that adds up to $0 in interest, because it's 0.15, and that is closer to $0. So no interest for the month of September, which then gives us a total operating or total budgeted, excuse me, total payments of 105,000. And so then we end up and see that we have $1,000 left over. Unfortunately, that's not enough because we have a cash surplus of 1,000, but we want 2,000. So we are going to again borrow $1,000 to get our ending cash balance to 2,000. So that's part A. Part B now says determine the amount of net cash flows from operating activities that they will report on their third quarter pro forma statement of cash flows. All right, so net cash flows for operating activities. We're going to look at the total of cash receipts first. So we need to look at cash receipts. So we add all those up. When we do that, we'll just put that down here. So cash receipts. When we do 90,000 plus 96,000 plus 104,000, we end up with $290,000. So that's our inflow. Now we need to take our outflows. So that would be our inventory purchases, our selling and administrative expenses, and our interest expenses. So it's all of those. So we're going to say minus inventory purchases. So we have to add all those up. So that's 81,000 plus 76,500 plus 85,500. And when we add all those up, we get 243,000. And then we also need to subtract our selling and administrative expenses. So minus the 18,500 plus 18,000 plus 19,500. Which should give us 56,000. And then minus our interest expense, which is just that $15. All right, so when we do all of that, so we take 290,000, subtract our 243,000, subtract the 56,000, and subtract your $15, you should end up with a net cash flow of negative, let me write this in a different color, negative $9,015. So you can either put it that way or you can put it this way. So our cash flow means that we have borrowed too much and spent too much when we look at this. And then finally, we look at part C, determine the amount of net cash flows from financing activities. So that was, remember, this part B was our operating activities. So we've spent too much with operating. So now we're looking at our financing activities. Well, if we look at this, we've got to look at the amount borrowed minus our repayments. So here we borrowed $1,500 at the beginning. So for part C, we've got, we'll put this in blue, $1,500 that we borrowed. We paid off $1,485, and then we borrowed another $1,000. So when we add that all up, we find that we end up with a net cash inflow of $1,015 for financing activities. And that is problem 1413B.